to connect a region of over 600 cultural bridges between our lands.
Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles. You're watching ASEAN in Focus on tonight's headlines. A 6.0 magnitude earthquake rocked the southern Philippines, according to the USGS, with local authorities warning of aftershocks and damage. The U.S. expressed readiness to provide humanitarian assistance to the earthquake victims in New Bataan, Davao de Oro. Myanmar's National Defense and Security Council accepts a request by the military to extend the state of emergency for 6 months, and that effectively delays elections the junta had pledged to hold by August. And most Asian markets rose today, and the dollar weakened further on hopes that the Fed Reserve's campaign of interest rate hikes could be close to an end after it acknowledged progress in its long-running battle against inflation. And we begin our news today with an earthquake here in the country. First, let's look at this dashboard video recorded from inside a parked minivan in Compostela in the province of Davao de Oro in the southern Philippines. And it shows people rushing up to the street and lights going out as the ground starts shaking during a 6.0 magnitude earthquake. Take a look. A 6.0 magnitude earthquake has rocked the Philippines, southern Philippines, according to the U.S. Geological Survey, with local authorities warning of aftershocks and possible damage. The shallow quake struck at 6:44 p.m. near Moncayo Municipality in Davao de Oro Province on Mindanao Island. Shallow earthquakes tend to cause more damage than deeper ones, but there were no immediate reports of major damage in the remote and mountainous gold mining region. Moncayo Police Staff Sergeant Harvey Asayas told AFP the quake was strong in the beginning, but gradually weakened and stopped after 40 seconds. Quakes are a daily occurrence in the country, which sits along the Pacific Ring of Fire, an arc of intense seismic as well as volcanic activity that stretches from Japan through Southeast Asia and across the Pacific Basin. Most are too weak to be felt by humans, but strong and destructive ones come at random with no technology available to predict when and where it will happen. In tonight's other news, the United States and the Philippines announced a deal today to give U.S. troops access to another 4 bases in the Southeast Asian nation as the longtime allies seek to counter China's military rise. Now, earlier, President Marcos met with U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin in Malacanang, where he expressed that the Philippines' future will always have to involve its longtime ally. First, let's listen in.
Perhaps exchange some ideas and thoughts and comments and information on the current situation geopolitically and of course more specifically here in the Asia-Pacific region, which has become a terribly complicated situation, and it is something that we can only navigate properly with the help of our partners and our allies. And as we traverse these rather troubled waters, geopolitical waters, economic waters that we are facing, are again great importance on that partnership, specifically with the United States, but all partnerships and alliances that we are able to make with our friends around the world.
We do have a strong relationship, and my goal, certainly President Biden's goal, is to strengthen that relationship in every way possible. You are a key ally and an important ally, and so from the defense perspective, we will continue to work together with our great partners to build and modernize your capability as well as increase our interoperability. So we are very, very happy to be here once again, and I look forward to a great discussion, Mr. President, again.
Now, as part of the agreement, the U.S. has allocated $82 million toward infrastructure improvements at 5 current EDCA sites and expand its military presence to 4 new sites in strategic areas of the country. Under the EDCA expansion unveiled today, the U.S. will have access to at least 9 military bases across the archipelago. The new sites have not been identified, but it has been widely reported that most of the new bases will be on the main island of Luzon, the closest Philippine landmass to Taiwan, where the U.S. already has access to 2 locations. The 4th will reportedly be on the western island of Palawan, facing the Spratly Islands in the hotly contested South China Sea, taking the number of sites there to 2. China's growing assertiveness on Taiwan and its building of bases in the disputed South China Sea have given fresh impetus to Washington and Manila to strengthen their partnership. Given its proximity to Taiwan and its surrounding waters, the Philippines' cooperation would be key in the event of a conflict with China. Now, to recall, a 4-star U.S. Air Force general has warned earlier that conflict could happen as early as 2025. The United States today expressed readiness to provide humanitarian assistance to the earthquake victims in New Bataan, Davao de Oro. This as U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, in his meeting with President Marcos Jr. at Malacanang Palace in Manila, expressed sympathy to the Philippines after a magnitude 6 earthquake rocked New Bataan, Davao de Oro on Wednesday night. Let's listen in.
And let me begin by saying that we were very sorry to learn yesterday that there was an earthquake down in Mindanao, and I'm relieved to hear from my team that the damage was not significant. At least that's what we understand thus far. And of course, we've not heard of significant injuries being reported as well, as we know how these things develop. And we stand ready to help in any way that we can. Again, I think our AID personnel are in the area, and they stand ready to help provide humanitarian assistance where possible. So please don't hesitate to reach out if there's a need.
Now, the Office of Civil Defense spokesperson, Assistant Secretary Bernardo Rafaelito Alejandro, said that some sustained minor injuries from the magnitude 6.0 earthquake. Alejandro said affected OCD regional offices and local disaster risk reduction management offices are currently conducting the assessment, coordination, and monitoring for further developments. He added that water and power supply, as well as communication lines in quake-hit areas, remain stable. Aftershocks are expected, according to the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology. In tonight's other news, Myanmar's National Defense and Security Council accepted a request by the military to extend a state of emergency for 6 months, effectively delaying elections the junta had pledged to hold by August, as protesters mark the anniversary of a 2021 military coup with a silent protest. Again, let's listen in.
မြို့သားကာကွယ်ရေးနှင့်လုံခြုံရေးကောင်စီတို့အသိပေးကြေညာအပ်ပါကြောင်းမြို့သားကာကွယ်ရေးနှင့်လုံခြုံရေးကောင်စီအနေဖြင့်လည်းကြေညာချက်ထုတ်ပြန်သွားမှာဖြစ်ပါကြောင်း
Junta Chief Min Aung Hlaing reiterated the pledge to work towards nationwide elections. He made it clear the military would maintain its prominent role. The military, he said, will always be the guardian of the interests of the state and people under whichever government comes, he said, according to MRTV. Extending the state of emergency pushes back the date by which elections must be held according to the country's constitution. The junta chief didn't provide a timeline for the polls, which cannot be held during a state of emergency. The Southeast Asian country's top generals led a putsch in February 2021 after 5 years of tense power sharing under a quasi-civilian political system created by the military. Protesters and exiled civilian leaders on Wednesday vowed to end what they called the army's illegal power grab. In major cities across Myanmar, streets emptied as people stayed home in protest, while hundreds of democracy supporters attended rallies in Thailand and the Philippines. Meanwhile, the UN Special Rapporteur for Myanmar warned that 2 years after its coup, Myanmar's military will try to legitimize its hold on power through sham elections this year. And he's urging the international community not to recognize or engage with the junta. For more, here's Joanne Soriano reporting from New York.
Nearly half of Myanmar's population is now living below the poverty line. 17.6 million people are expected to be in need of humanitarian aid in 2023. 17.6 million people. That is in contrast to a total of 1 million people who were in need of humanitarian aid before the coup.
The independent UN Special Investigator on Myanmar warns that the country's military rulers plan to seek legitimacy by orchestrating a sham election this year. He calls on the international community to stand firm against military rule, create a coalition of member states to enforce strong coordinated sanctions, and support the Democratic National Unity Government. Speaking to reporters here in New York, the Special Rapporteur says there are 3 things that the junta needs.
Listen, there's 3 things that the junta needs to sustain itself. It needs money, it needs weapons, and it needs legitimacy. The junta does not have legitimacy in the eyes of the people of Myanmar. So what they're seeking to do is to create the veneer of legitimacy in the international community and then project that veneer through their media sources to the population to say, look, we are being accepted by the international community.
Andrew stresses that it is extremely important for the international community for member states to be extremely cautious.
And the first and foremost recommendation is to renounce the so-called election that the junta is planning to orchestrate in the middle part of this year. Given the fact that they have failed in large part to secure legitimacy by the international community, given the resolution of the General Assembly shortly after the coup, given what the Security Council, the resolution of the Security Council of December, given the actions of most states, member states of the United Nations, they have been unsuccessful in securing legitimacy. I'm hopeful that at this 2-year mark, that we as an international community are going to examine very closely the role that we have played over the last 2 years. The things that we have done that has not been in the interest of the people of Myanmar, the things that we as an international community have failed to do.
Regarding sanctions, Mr. Andrews has this to say.
We have episodic sanctions on this or that entity, this or that individual. We've had some progress, and believe me, I greatly appreciate the fact that countries have been moving forward with respect to sanctions and pressure, but it's simply not enough, and it's not strategic, and it's not coordinated, and that is precisely what the people of Myanmar need, and really the playbook is Ukraine.
Efforts by the 10-member Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, to bring peace to the country, which is a member of the bloc, have stalled as fighting continues to rage. In 2021, ASEAN agreed on the so-called five-point consensus, which calls for a cessation of violence and constructive dialogue. But the junta has ignored it. Divisions in ASEAN have also complicated attempts to resolve the crisis. Joanne Soriano, New York, New York. Eagle News, we live in extraordinary times.
The United States slapped fresh sanctions on Myanmar a day before the Southeast Asian country marked the second anniversary of a military coup that launched a violent campaign against democracy activists. The U.S. Treasury placed sanctions on Myanmar Energy Minister Myo Myen-oo and the top two officials of the state-owned Myanmar oil and gas enterprise. Here's more.
Achieved over the last decade. Today, the United States is imposing sanctions on 6 individuals and 3 entities linked to the regime's effort to generate revenue, procure arms, including the senior leadership of Burma's Ministry of Energy, Myanmar Oil and Gas Enterprise, and Burma's Air Force, as well as an arms dealer and a family member of a previously designated business associate of the military. We are also sanctioning the Union Electoral Commission, which the regime has manipulated and deployed to advance its flawed election. It is clear that the regime's planned election will not be free or fair, while the regime continues to kill, detain, and force possible contenders to flee and continues to inflict brutal violence against its peaceful opponents. These so-called elections held under these conditions will only serve as a trigger for further violence and instability. The United States will continue to promote accountability for the military's atrocities, including through the support to the UN's independent investigative mechanism for Myanmar. We will also continue to support other international efforts to protect and support vulnerable populations, including Rohingya. We welcome the actions taken by our allies and partners, including Canada, the UK, who also took action today to urge the regime to end crisis, and we look forward to building our cooperation with the UN, ASEAN, and international community to increase diplomatic and economic pressure against the military and in support of a peaceful, democratic, prosperous Burma.
In tonight's other news, Singapore has detained an 18-year-old man, accusing him of supporting the Islamic State group and planning to carry out attacks, according to security officials. Now, Muhammad Irfan Daniel bin Mohammed Noor, a Singaporean student, was detained in December under the Internal Security Act, or ISA, which allows for detention without trial for up to 2 years. He became radicalized after viewing Islamic State group propaganda online, according to authorities in a statement, adding that he wanted to use social media to gather fighters to conduct attacks in Singapore. Authorities said his plans included recruiting a suicide car bomber to attack a military camp, as well as bombing a grave site. Now, such cases are rare in the multicultural and multiracial city-state. And most Asian markets rose today, and the dollar weakened further on hopes the Federal Reserve's campaign of interest rate hikes could be close to an end after it acknowledged progress in its long-running battle against inflation. Again, let's listen in.
How long do you see then the federal funds rate remaining at this elevated level?
You know, so my forecast and that of my colleagues, as you will see from the SEP, and I mean, there are many different forecasts, but generally it's a forecast of slower growth, some softening in labor market conditions, and inflation moving down steadily, but not quickly. And in that case, if the economy performs broadly in line with those expectations, it will not be appropriate to cut rates this year, to loosen policy. I think certainty is just not appropriate here. Inflation, it's just harder to forecast inflation. It may come down faster, it may take longer to come down. And you know, our job is to deliver inflation back to target, and we will do that, but I think we're going to be cautious about declaring victory and, you know, sending signals that that we think that the game is won, because we've got a long way to go. It's the early stages of disinflation, and it's most welcome to be able to say that we are now in disinflation. But that's great, but we just see that it has to spread through the economy and that it's going to take some time. That's all. So we've raised rates 4.5 percentage points, and we're talking about a couple of more rate hikes to get to that level we think is appropriately restrictive. And why do we think that's probably necessary? We think because inflation is still running very hot. We're, of course, taking into account long and variable lags, and we're thinking about that.
Now, the decision to lift rates by the smallest amount in almost a year came after a series of the data points suggested the world's top economy was slowing down, with inflation at its lowest since October 2021. The broadly dovish turn from the Fed provided an extra fillip to investors who had grown concerned that January's rally may have been overdone and that the rate hikes would continue for well into the year. The news pushed all three main indexes on Wall Street higher, with the Nasdaq up 2%. Tech firms prefer a low interest rate environment. In early Asian trade, meanwhile, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Shanghai, Sydney, Seoul, Wellington, Taipei, and Jakarta all rose. And as my usual habit, I'd like to end the day on a positive note. Let's encourage and build each other up so that no one is left behind. And that's it for tonight's broadcast of ASEAN in Focus. I'm Alma Angeles. We'll see you back tomorrow. Stay in the news because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.